Hello everybody, and welcome back to my channel. My name is Serrated Cucumber, and in today's video, we're going to be taking another look at episode 5. I feel like this was a little bit of a neglected subject from my last theory and predictions video, and looking back, I'm thinking that this needed its own separate video all along. As we approach the 5th and final installment of Don't Nod's episodic series, many references throughout the fanbase have been made to the alleged upcoming death of Sean Diaz, the protagonist of our adventure. So, that begs the question, how much validity is there to the claim that Sean will die? Will Sean be the only death? Will anybody die at all? And that's what I'm going to be going over in this video. So without further ado, let's get into the main body. Obviously, major plot spoilers ahead for all of the Life is Strange games, you've been warned. So first we need to explore the avenue of Life is Strange 2's structure from a story perspective and whether this should be indicative of Sean's death. Life is Strange 2 is an episodic format and has often been referred to as tragedy porn. While the game's events have invoked tragedy, such as Mushroom's death, Chris being hit by a car, Finn being shot, etc., I'm not talking about tragedy in that sense, I'm referring to the plot structure of a tragedy, which typically almost ends in death, always. The tragic plot format was mostly coined by Aristotle, origins dating back to ancient Greek theatre, when plays like Antigone were performed at the Theatre of Dionysus. This has seen its way into more modern theatre, with Shakespeare's own Romeo and Juliet being a tragic tale. The format of a tragedy is as follows. Usually, some exposition is needed within a story to establish characters, the beginning of relationships, character motives, and may foreshadow or hint at the later elements of what is to come. This, in Sean's case, would be the Seattle segment, in which he enjoys relaxing in his room and preparing for the party with Jen and Lila. We gain an insight into his hobbies and familial ties, as well as his educational achievements or lack thereof. There will be an inciting incident to spark the plot. For example, in Antigone, this would be her brothers being killed in battle. This event is usually large enough to invoke very specific feelings and opinions of a character and may often be political, or feelings about another individual or group. Esteban being killed would constitute this inciting incident, as it completely turns Sean's life around within the span of seconds, turning him from an innocent high school student into a framed murderer and a criminal runaway. From now on, Sean's life is different, and always will be, which leads us to the next part of a tragedy. An unfolding chain of events will take place which complicates matters for the characters. Things go from bad to worse. In Antigone, for example, this would be her capture before King Creon for violating his decree for her not to bury her brother Polynices. And for Sean, this is his life on the run, the people he meets. He accidentally manages to get Mushroom the dog killed. He loses control over his brother's power and can potentially cause Chris Erickson to be hit by a police car. He leaves behind the Reynolds, loses his relationship with Daniel, his lover, his money, and his eye in episode 3. These events transpire in a tragic order, going from bad to worse. Generally, after this, there will be a turning point within the story, something which makes the characters change their mind on something, a strong opinion. This is near, around, or directly on the climax of the story, during which something significant will happen. In this case, I believe this is Sean taking Daniel from Haven Point and the restoration of their loving brotherly bond. So far, we hadn't seen any connection like that since episode 1. Really, their relationship had been under an intense strain. But after episode 4, everything seems much calmer, which leads us to the next plot point of a tragedy. The falling action, and the denouement, which may be episode 5. So, does Life is Strange 2 follow the route of a tragedy? Loosely speaking, yes, it does. The plot is strung together, underpinned by this foreboding feeling. However, after the turning point of the story, typically the characters begin to realise that this was too late, and that the damage is already done and irreparable. In Aristotle's tragedy Antigone, for example, as I seem to keep using this to illustrate my point, Creon changes his mind and revokes his decree by the time that 3 people have already committed suicide because of it. His actions were too late. In Life is Strange 2, perhaps Sean has gone too far with the Mexico plan. He has committed crimes, is wanted by the police, and is now stuck on what to do. He doesn't have many options left. Which is where Sean's hubris ties in. Hubris refers to an excess of pride usually present within a tragedy. While Sean is never particularly prideful of himself, he's prideful in the Puerto Lobos plan, and despite the recommendations of even his grandparents, he does not falter in his desire to reach his father's homeland, refusing to give up on this goal which is ridiculously difficult, and relies on the forlorn hope of Puerto Lobos being a decent place for him to live. Hubris is seen as a strongly negative thing, particularly throughout theatre, and usually an excess to pride will lead to this tragedy, which is typically one thing and one thing only: the death of people. So, will Sean's pride lead to death? Well, maybe, but there are also arguments against this. For example, his eye. Sean has arguably suffered enough. We know that Don't Nod like to strive for impact within their narratives, and Sean losing an eye has been a really significant plot point, which has influenced him as a character a lot, and has served to harden and develop him as a person. So why then would Don't Nod bother killing him off, as he has already suffered a consequence big enough to change his life forever? It doesn't make sense. And this ties into my next point about Sean's development. At this point, from a narrative perspective, it would be so much more impactful to see Sean live with the consequences of his journey, to carry on his life as Esteban would have wanted, to grow up into the mature young man the series is shaping him up to be. To just kill him off simply for shock value would seek to erase all of the development his character has been through, and this is how Sean defies the tragedy plot. He does change and develop significantly. Whereas in a tragedy, characters will typically remain stagnant, which is how these inherent clashes in ideals and hubristic natures come about. Sean defies this, meaning he's less likely to die. Another reason he's less likely to meet a fatal end is because of the game's underlying themes of racism and culture, which have played quite the role in the plotline of the story thus far. Sean's culture is embedded within him, his goals to get to Mexico, his little Spanish colloquialisms, and his pride in carrying the Puerto Lobos lighter, etc. The game's entire goal has been talking about racism, so what kind of message would it send if Sean is killed at the wall, a physical manifestation of the racism present throughout the political sphere in America? I mentioned this a bit in my previous video, but if Sean is killed at the Mexican-American border, does this give off any kind of empowering message other than people suffer because of racism? Because yes, we know that, and we've had it reinforced through the 2 beatings Sean suffers due to racial prejudice. However, would it not be so much better to have Sean power through the oppressive, brutal nature of racist America and emerge triumphant, still alive? Don't Nod could take this route, sure, but they could also take the route of using Sean as a martyr, undermining the story of empowerment they've been building up throughout the game's narrative. However, we also can't ignore the potential of court theory, with the mention of Jolena Shaw throughout episode 4. I talked about this at great length in my video titled Will Sean Go to Jail, which you can watch on my channel, but after this video, stick around. Well, we've established that Sean could very well die, with the extensive foreshadowing thrown at it and all. There are several death omens in the leaked achievement, and certain lines of dialogue such as Sean saying they're gonna bury me in this thing when looking at his hoodie in episode 3's flashback segment. It's truly terrifying. However, this is a choice-determinant game, and with that may come choice-determinant endings. I think this will extend further than simply a binary ending like we saw in the first season of Life is Strange, and while I'm not quite sure how many endings we'll get, I'd place bets on it being 3 or more. One of these could include Sean's death, but we've also got to consider the options for other deaths, the main candidate being Daniel, our secondary protagonist. I've thought about this a little, and think about it. Daniel honestly hasn't made any huge sacrifices for Sean yet. Some have even referred to him, albeit a little cruelly, as an ingrate, unappreciative of everything Sean does for him. Which is why I think that one of the endings will be Daniel sacrificing himself for Sean. If you treated him well, and he loves you. This would naturally break Sean's heart, but it would be a really sickening twist on the tragic plotline. Life is Strange 2 is an 18 rated game, meaning it could feature Daniel's death. Obviously it would be sickening and heartbreaking, but it could happen. Many have theorised about an Of Mice and Men style ending where Sean must kill Daniel in order to stop the pain and destruction caused by his powers. However, given the calming ending of episode 4, I don't believe this would come to fruition. Sean probably won't have much of a reason to kill Daniel. However, Daniel sacrificing himself is pretty plausible. I know the decision for Sean's death has likely 100% already been made if he is going to die, but I'd like to say something, that having a character die and lose everything is so much less impactful than having a character live and almost lose everything. Killing Sean would be an unexpected cop-out at this point, and I'd rather see him grow as a person from the pain and trauma he's endured as well as Daniel. Neither of them deserve this. I want my precious boys to live and heal from the pain they've endured. And with that, I guess I have to come to some form of conclusion since this video is sort of rambly and probably not very cohesive, and for that I apologise. I think that there will be at least one ending where Sean dies, but that ending will be entirely choice determinant. Daniel could also be a potential candidate to die, but not at the hand of his brother. He could sacrifice himself for Sean if he was raised well, and Sean would have to live with losing everything he had. thus completing the tragedy. Well, let me know what you all think. Personally, as much as I don't want Sean to die, I can definitely see it happening. As for Daniel, I think if he dies, it will be in the form of a sacrifice. I hope for an ending where both boys can live happily ever after, or as happy as you can be after losing literally everything in your life. I hope that you guys enjoyed this video. Please give it a like if you did, as it really helps me out, and feel free to start some discussion in the comments. Do you think Sean will die, and if so, how? I see a lot of reference to guns within Life is Strange, perhaps he'll be shot. As always, remember to keep your cucumbers serrated and have a nice day. Bye!